Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. How's it going? I'm coming to you from a little town up in the mountains called Jermuk, Armenia. It's a really cool spa town, kind of like a ski resort town or something like that. And it's very, very nice up here. So I'm doing my live outside, even though I may not have the best connection. I've been working on my connection here for the last few minutes, and hopefully I can make it through this. But thank you for watching. I appreciate you all being here. Let me know where you're watching from, please, by posting your location in the chat. I like to see that, and it helps the algorithm, so what's not to like? And let me pop that chat out so I can keep an eye on it. Make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. Thank you. Somebody's from Western North Carolina, I guess, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Dodgeville, Wisconsin, Michigan, Denver, Colorado, Montana, Jersey, Ohio, all over the place. Amazing. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for watching. We got a lot to talk about tonight. Obviously, these riots that have been taking place in Los Angeles and San Francisco are not stopping. They're just getting worse, and they're spreading to other cities now, other places around the United States. And even I've seen calls for no kings protests. This is protesting against, nobody can hear me. So, okay, there we go. We got a connection. Okay. I don't know why this is acting so weird from here today. Yeah. Okay. I'm back. I'm back. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Not the greatest connection out here, but I'm back. Okay. So I'm gonna check into whether or not I can switch over to a different network. I think I can, and it'll go faster. So anyway, what I'm saying is that in Minneapolis, St. Paul in 2020, there was $500 million in property damage in that one city alone. There were 1,500 properties affected. 60% of those properties were uninsured. So the damages to those properties did not show up in that $500 million number. And so this is huge. I mean, the recovery in Minneapolis is still ongoing 5 years later. They say it could take more than 10 years for Minneapolis to recover from the damage from that one event, or that one, event of George Floyd dying in police custody. In Atlanta, they lost $15 million in one weekend. It was not so much the big box stores, although you see videos of the big box stores that are being looted, the Walmarts and the Targets and that sort of thing. But it was really immigrant-owned small businesses that were affected the most, because they're the ones who actually go into these bad neighborhoods and set up their little gas stations or whatever. And the vast majority of those were uninsured. And that's important to understand. All right. Now, Bear says, I'm watching from a liberal hellhole. Well, which one, Bear? Now, the costs went beyond just the damage that was done by the rioters. The cost for the Black Lives Matter protests, you have to also include the emergency mobilizations of the Guard, the police, barricades that were put out, extra bodyguard services or security services that were paid for by the companies trying to protect their properties. I got some contracts to help provide security for some very large American companies that were concerned that these mobs would come and attack their facilities and destroy hundreds of millions of dollars worth of technology. Spiking insurance rates. After all of this took place, you can imagine that insurance companies that lost $500 million in Minneapolis alone are going to raise the rates for people because it's obviously more likely that that sort of thing may happen again. They also had to defer or cancel services like trash pickup and bus services, bus routes, taxis. I mean, I think it's very likely that Waymo taxis are going to be sort of blocked from going into certain neighborhoods in Los Angeles, at least, for the foreseeable future because of this. We saw this happening where the rioters called a bunch of Waymo taxis to one location and then set them all on fire. This happening while Maxine Waters is telling everybody that there is no actual violence taking place. I'm not sure what you call that, but that looks a lot like violence to me. I don't know. So this weekend is going to be lit, folks. I talked about that on yesterday's live. This No Kings movement, nokings.org, has planned over 1,800 protests, which could easily turn into riots, across the United States. 1,800 different cities across the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that there will be protests and riots in 1,800 cities. That just means that they are calling for protests in those cities and trying to get people to show up. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about how foreign entities like the Russians and the Chinese are assisting this organization in doing that, whipping up sentiment against the government and getting people out there to riot. All right. So we saw, in addition to the costs of vandalism and property destruction, businesses being looted, et cetera, you got spiking insurance rates. After that, you've got a shrinking city tax base because all of those companies had to close, all those mom and pop shops. Less than 5% of them have reopened in Minneapolis since the riots of 2020 on Lake Street specifically. So you can imagine that that's a massive hit to the tax base because the city gets a lot of its revenue from these small businesses paying their taxes. So these small businesses are saying, screw it, we're out of here. I'm gone. And what that means is these cities are going to be hurting, and that causes retail closures, causes out-migration. The increased property taxes causes more out-migration, and it becomes a vicious cycle, and it leads to this absolute draining, what they call white flight. It's not just white people, it's just smart people that are leaving these urban areas. Anybody who can leave is leaving. So then you get the food desert. You get the people who are stuck there that don't have the chance to leave, that they have to go much further to get groceries and to get food and to get, the supplies that they need because the local businesses have all gone out of business. This is happening in not just places like, LA and Chicago. This is happening in upscale places like that were once upscale, like Seattle and Portland. And that adds to the total cost of these riots. So just imagine, just add this up. The people who live in these cities like Minneapolis, they still have to eat. And so they got to go get groceries. And so if it takes them an extra 10 minutes or an extra 20 minutes to find a grocery store now because all the little mom and pop grocery stores in their city have gone away, well, that extra gasoline or that extra bus fare continues to add to the cost long term of these riots. And we're talking about everybody there, lots of people. So it's probably something like, oh gosh, we're talking like billions of dollars more. And that's not even calculable. You can't even figure that out. Ego Peak, thank you very much, asks, is it a conspiracy to say that all of these military-aged men that came across the border these last 4 years are part of these destructive protests? Yeah, it would be a conspiracy theory to say that. Uh, I wouldn't say all of them did, but there are certainly a bunch of them who are participating in these protests, as evidenced by them running around waving Guatemalan, Nicaraguan, and Mexican flags. I mean, there you go. So yeah, it is definitely happening. Now, question, how likely is civil war in America during Trump's term? Jeffrey, that's a good question. I'm going to answer that right now as I go through this. So stay tuned, okay? Keep listening. Now, what I'm doing is I'm comparing the riots we're seeing today to the riots that we saw in 2020 for Black Lives Matter, because the same forces are behind both riots. I went through in detail yesterday on yesterday's live. You can go watch that, and showed you how powerful forces are taking advantage of this, of the Trump administration being in power, to stoke unrest, to be agents provocateurs in those neighborhoods and get people whipped up and angry, and use all of the useful idiots, so to speak, to do these riots and cause this damage and create chaos across the country. Why do they want chaos across the country? Because they want you to regret ever voting for Donald Trump. And they want the next election to be to have people so absolutely just exhausted of all the chaos and all the crime and all the shenanigans that they just say, I'm just going to vote for the safe candidate, somebody that can put a lid on all of this. And so as I compare these two, I'm talking about the Black Lives Matter, but I want you to keep in mind that we're also talking about what will happen from the riots we're seeing now. As I said, in Minneapolis, less than 5% of Lake Street businesses are fully recovered. There's now empty lots, graffiti all over the place. Crime is rising and still much higher than it was in uptown Minneapolis. The police force, post 2020, after those riots, the police force dropped by almost half in Minneapolis. More than 300 officers left their post and either retired or resigned after those riots. What that results in is violent crime is up 75% over 2020. It's still today, 5 years later, it's up more than 50% over the pre-BLM riots levels. Okay. Now, here's where this really gets good, really gets interesting. There were, after those riots, those Black Lives Matter riots, there was $111 million paid out in lawsuits and settlements paid by the city of Minneapolis to protesters for actions that they did during the protest. So here's people that are rioting in Minneapolis. The police come out to do their job. They try to break up the riots, try to get these people to go home. Those people, once they declare it an unlawful assembly, they have no right to be there. It's illegal for them to be there. And the police shoot tear gas and pepper balls and things like that. Rioters then get hurt. Then they turn around and sue the city of Minneapolis. And for some inexplicable reason, they win those lawsuits. There were 13 police misconduct lawsuits brought against the city. That resulted in $84 million in judgments paid out to the rioters. Payouts included $2.4 million to a protester who lost an eye to a pepper ball or a rubber bullet. $900,000 to 2 women who were hit by projectiles fired by the police. Those are likely flashbangs or tear gas. And nearly $1 million paid out to journalists who got injured doing the job. Now, let me tell you something. I'm going to show you a news article here from RT, Russia Today. And I'm going to talk more about, in a minute, how Russian state media is amplifying these protests. They're reporting in English on social media. The bot farms from Russia and China are amplifying those reports and putting them out to more and more people. Millions of people are seeing these reports here. Okay, so let me see if I can find this. Here's one of them. Riots over, immigration raids in LA continue. Where's the other one? Here? Yeah. LA cops shoot photojournalist. That's a little too big. Let's make that smaller. LA cops shoot photojournalist in the head. New York Post's Toby Canaham was injured by a rubber bullet during the protest against immigration raids. Okay, so that just appeared on RT's website in English. That's RT English. So that's not Russia Today news that is meant to be consumed by Russians. It's Russia Today's news, which is owned by, it's Russian state media, and that is aimed at Westerners. That's aimed at Americans, right? And that stuff, you might say, well, I don't read Russia Today, so who cares? But it doesn't matter if you read Russia Today. It is that those articles are being spread all over social media by these bot farms that are put together by Russian hackers and Chinese hackers and others. Okay. So what that does, okay, this journalist was filming the police as they were surrounded by protesters. If you recall the video of the police cars that were smashed by guys throwing rocks off the overpass, and the police that were in those cars had to flee and get underneath the overpass to keep from getting hit by rocks. Some of them did get hit in the head by rocks and were injured. And so people were crowding around and trying to get a better view of those police officers, and the police were trying to disperse them with pepper balls. And this guy's filming, this journalist is filming, and one of the pepper balls, you can see the policeman go like pow, and you can see the pepper ball go whoop, boom, hits him right in the head. And he cusses and drops his camera and starts screaming, "Oh, they shot me in the head, they shot me in the head." Look, like I said, I've told you many times, I spent 2 years covering these riots during the first Trump administration. I've been shot by more pepper balls and more rubber bullets and more tear gas than I care to remember. And that's just an occupational hazard if you're going to cover these kinds of things, okay? Now, I didn't go sue the city of Seattle for shooting me with a pepper ball. I was standing behind guys that needed to get shot with pepper balls. And I was trying to kind of stay out of the way, but at one point I couldn't. And I told you about it the other day. There's this kid that was shining a green laser in these federal agents' eyes at the courthouse, and they started shooting pepper balls at him, and I was getting hit with those pepper balls because I was standing behind that guy, and I was trying to get him to stop. And then he accused me of being a cop, and I almost got my arms ripped off. That was exciting. Okay. So, folks, we got more than 3,000 people watching right now. And so please hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and go to chuckholton.com and become a supporter over there. But you want to make sure you're subscribed to this podcast for sure, right? So it's mind-boggling to me that the city of Minneapolis paid out almost $1 million to journalists who were hit by projectiles as they were filming these riots. Because if you're in the riot, that just might happen. You might get hit by tear gas. You might get hit by rubber bullets. That's occupational hazard. Comes with the territory. Now, that those events and those payouts are creating now an incentive for people to go out and protest and confront the police, attack the police, try to provoke the police into using pepper balls or tear gas or rubber bullets or whatever. because they saw what happened in Minneapolis, and now they're going, well, I want to pay out too. So I'm going to run out there and I'm going to get myself shot. Matter of fact, I saw a video on the RT website of a guy walking around in the street getting lit up by police with pepper balls, and he's dancing around, but he won't go away because he wants to get shot. And why does he want to get shot? You know, some people are just too stupid to come in out of the rain. No, he wants to get shot because he's going to probably sue the city of Los Angeles, and knowing the activist judges that they have there, he'll probably win. And so cities are now operating in fear of that liability, and that what that leads to is hesitant enforcement. Very often, city leaders are telling the police to not take a heavy hand against these rioters. And so what does that mean? That means the rioters win. Now, I call this the lawsuit tax. The lawsuit tax is just a hidden drain on really every aspect of our society. We live in a hyper-litigious culture. There's no question about it. And a hyper-litigious culture leads to skyrocketing costs. Insurance premiums are sky high for everybody, doctors, contractors, business owners, and all of those costs get passed on to the consumer. So why does it cost you $300 to go get your teeth cleaned in the United States when I can go get my teeth cleaned in Panama and get just as good of a cleaning with the same equipment and a well-trained dentist for $25? Why is that? Well, a large part of the difference in cost is the dentist has to have massive amounts of malpractice insurance. One time I was out cutting firewood with the chainsaw and I cut my knee open with a chainsaw. It was just cut it right down, cut a groove in my patella. So I went to the emergency room to get it stitched up, and the doctor said, gosh, we got to send you for an x-ray and see if anything's bad in there. So he sent me for an x-ray. Then I came back and he said, well, I think I better send, the x-ray didn't show anything, but I better send you for an MRI just in case. So then I went in for an MRI and so on and so forth. Later on, I became pretty good friends with that doctor, and he told me one time over dinner, you know, you really didn't need that MRI, but I didn't know you then, and I didn't know if you were going to sue me or not. And so just to cover my own butt, I had you go get the MRI so you couldn't come back later and sue me for not giving you an MRI, which people will do. He said, I've got to pay $20,000 a month just for malpractice insurance to do my job. Okay, so that, I mean, that's just in the medical care realm, but frivolous lawsuits increase the cost of everything. Many lawsuits settle in order to avoid the high legal expenses that would come with having to fight those lawsuits, even if the lawsuits are baseless. As a matter of fact, when I was a stockbroker and the market crashed back in 2000, 2001, there were lawyers going around putting up billboards saying, have you lost money in the market? If so, call this number, we'll help you get your money back. So a lot of people, obviously, the market was down, everybody was losing money. So a lot of people called the lawyers, and the lawyers would say, okay, sign this piece of paper and I'll help you get your money back. Well, that piece of paper was a complaint against their broker. And basically their strategy was, the financial services business is so arcane and complex that there's no possible way your broker could go years and years being your broker without somehow, somewhere breaking a law or doing something incorrectly. And so all we have to do is find the place where he did something incorrectly and you get all your money back. And so people were lining up to sue their brokers at that time. I got sued by probably 15 of my clients during that time. Many of them had absolutely negations. So your property taxes could easily go up due to these protests because the city is losing revenue because of all the businesses that are being shut down, and their costs are going up because these protesters are intentionally going out and getting themselves shot or, you know, whatever, confronting the police And even the fact that they are breaking the law, maybe even committing felonies in the process, somehow doesn't shield the police and the city from having to pay these large settlements to the protesters. And it's just a vicious cycle. Okay? But I mean, that's only one reason why those guys are doing this. But let me explain to you now how this leads to more of the very things that they say they're protesting against. Okay? Uh, First, we've still got a couple thousand people online here. Uh, so make sure you go hit that like button, folks. That does help. And if you just joined us, type in the chat box and let us know where you're watching from. Like to see that. Okay, so here's how this works. Step one, or stage one, we get protests targeting ICE or law enforcement or targeting government offices, and these protests turn violent. So the police have to pay a bunch of money in overtime. In Minneapolis, during the Black Lives Matter protests, they paid more than $12 million in overtime to the police. That's money that comes out of your tax dollars, okay? So then federal government gets involved and the National Guard gets called out, the military gets deployed, curfews are put in place, et cetera, et cetera. Then you move on to stage two, which is the costs involved, the economic fallout of the looting, the fires, the property destruction, the stores being shut down, the increased security that has to be paid for. And all of that leads to job losses, food deserts, retail deserts, and a shrinking tax base. What they call actually in Detroit, they called white flight. You know, I've done a lot of reporting on this from Detroit that you know, the riots that they had back in the 80s in Detroit are still being felt there today because they resulted in exactly what I'm talking about. People just, anybody who could leave Detroit did. They picked up and left. And so Detroit is still the same size geographically. And so the fire department still has the same area to cover. The police department still has the same area to patrol. The trash pickup services still have the same area to drive around and try to pick up trash. But there's far fewer people to pay for all that stuff. And so that leads to a reduction in services, an increase in crime, an increase in drugs. The broken windows theory fits right into that. So that economic fallout creates phase three, which is phase three of the death of civilization, which is civic decline. The residents flee, police get demoralized and start quitting or retiring early. Essential services get disrupted. There's very little medical care in those deserts, you know. The neighborhoods start to decay. Public fear goes up because crime is up and policing is down. And what that creates a new norm that people get used to. People get used to the crime and the decay and all of that. So, you know, in a healthy, functioning neighborhood, if there's somebody rampaging through the street, spray painting cars, people would go out and do something about that. If the police aren't going to do anything about it, you would go out and do something about it. Go out and protect your own property and maybe the property of your neighbors. That's a healthy community. But these riots lead to dysfunctional communities, unhealthy communities where decay and crime and fear, et cetera, and low services are just the norm. Poverty, welfare, dependency, addiction, all of that gets encouraged because of these steps, this decline. That leads to the breakdown of order. And this is where Minneapolis is now. Trash goes uncollected. 911 calls go unanswered. You get put on hold if you call the police. Justice gets delayed. It takes years to prosecute somebody, if ever. You know, the murder clearance rate in Minneapolis is so low, something like less than 40%. That means if you just walk up to somebody in the street and cap them in the head and walk away, there's a 60% chance you'll get away with it, because they're not able to, they don't have the resources that they need to investigate those kinds of crimes anymore. The same in Detroit, same in Chicago, same in Los Angeles. What that leads to, so because those essential services, policing and fire and medical and ambulance and trash pickup and all that stuff, is not happening, people start taking matters into their own hands. And then you get gated communities, private security patrols and things like that. Well, what does that lead to? That leads to a pulling apart of society. There becomes two classes: the people who can afford to live in a gated community that's secure, and the people who cannot. And so it widens the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And I mean, ostensibly, these leftists that are out there protesting all this stuff, they're protesting because they say that the gap is already too wide. But the very protests that they're engaging in cause the gap to widen even further. It's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then step 5 in the death of civilization is the reactionary clampdowns. People get so exhausted with the crime and the high taxes and all, just all the things that I just described to you, that they'll vote for anybody who will restore order. And that could easily lead to authoritarian policies, the suspension of essential rights, maybe even like National Guard troops permanently stationed across cities. We see that in Washington, D.C. There's basically always National Guard troops patrolling around downtown D.C. now. So what we're talking about is, again, self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Now, I'm just looking here to see if we got any questions. Let's see how we... Bass is from Cuba. She needs to go, Truther says. Yeah. Okay. Picasso, I'm going to ask you, this is not a place for you to come here and preach, especially if you're preaching in all caps. So you're just distracting me. So I'm going to put you in timeout for a few minutes, because you're just, capitalizing on my platform to, sit there and preach. And look, I'm all for sharing scripture and things like that. But if it's not relevant to the discussion, then don't do it. Okay. Saturday, June 14 protests yet discussed. Diane, I did an hour on those yesterday. So go watch yesterday's live. And I talked about those a lot. But that's what they're pushing for here, is they want riots all over the country on June 14th. Now, how do we get from a no kings movement to the authoritarian reality that they say they're trying to avoid? How does the nokings.org movement actually cause the very thing that they say that they're trying to stop? Well, they call Trump a wannabe tyrant. But if their actions undermine the rule of law, then the natural result of that undermining is more government control, not less. I mean, we see it. They've got 4,000 National Guard troops out now. They've got 700 Marines that are helping to maintain or try to restore order in Los Angeles. And we will very likely see a lot more of that around the country as these things spread. So you may see National Guard called out in Georgia and Atlanta. You may see them called out in Chicago. You may see them called out in New York. You may see them called out in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. So they're actually getting more of what they say they're protesting against. Why? Because a society that cannot control itself has to be controlled by force. As chaos spreads, what you're going to see is people starting to beg for order at any cost, even if it means voting for somebody that's not going to be good for America, or even military curfews, or mass surveillance, or suspension of our freedoms. And there's ample historical evidence for this, not just from the United States, but from around the world. If you look at Europe in 1939, after the First World War, between the First and Second World Wars, this is, textbook. So the irony is the people who shout no kings today might be creating the very monarchy that they fear, the very authoritarian rule that they fear. And I have a feeling that they actually wouldn't mind that as long as the person that's controlling the authoritarian structure agrees with them. Because as I've said, what I learned in covering Antifa for 2 years is that Antifa doesn't want to abolish the police. Antifa wants to become the police. And they try. They try to create their own law and enforce it everywhere that they are, doing their thing. Out there LARPing, right? So it's the same playbook as 2020. And I think that we can assume that we're going to see more of this because, as I said yesterday, there are organizations out there like Churla and like the nokings.org, which is supported by more than 150 progressive organizations, including the college Democrats, the Democratic Party, the United, several different unions that are supporting it financially, as well as the Open Society Foundation and lots of left-wing elite billionaires. And it's being magnified by the media, who is doing everything they can to show this around the country in a way that will cause copycats to crop up. And it's working. Yesterday in Atlanta, last night, they had to call in the SWAT teams and the riot police to quell riots, and they did a pretty good job of quelling those riots, but there's a good chance that they will continue to spread. And ultimately, this just increases the costs for everyone. All of us have to pay for this. The rioters don't necessarily have to pay for it because those people likely don't pay taxes. But those of us who do pay taxes are the ones that are on the hook for cleaning up their mess, for paying the overtime for the police, for making up the difference from the businesses that go under and are no longer paying property taxes to the city, and for the people who have just left altogether and gone somewhere else. Maybe what that means is that if you can, you need to be one of those people who leaves and vote with your feet and go to a place that's less likely to have protests like this. Now, the estimated weekly cost to the taxpayer of this deployment of Marines and National Guardsmen in Los Angeles, I calculated it out and estimated it's about $21.3 million a week. And that includes lost wages for the guard troops that are pulled away from their civilian jobs, because you have to understand that the lost productivity is a financial hit on our society, because we got to take those guys out of their jobs and put them in the streets to try to restore order. So not only do we have to pay them for additional service, because guard troops only get paid when they're on duty, but the city that they work in is losing that productivity and therefore that tax revenue that they would have made if they had been working. So the protests are spreading. Again, they're calling for 1,800 different protests on the 14th of June across the United States. Okay, so now let's move on and talk about, wait, hang on. I want to check for some questions here. My chat thing just okay. The chat thing just updated, so I've got this stuff flying by like crazy. Um, let's see here. We need the military on the streets. Yeah, we're going to have it on the streets. Thank you for watching, everybody. Make sure that you're liking the podcast there. Hit the like button and post where you're watching from, because we just gained almost 1,000 viewers after the last time I asked you to do that. So that's good. All right. So now let's talk about how foreign actors are stoking the fire. Specifically, I'm going to talk about Russia and China here, but it also likely uh, is being done by Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, anybody else who doesn't like us, and even people in the United States who are wanting to bring down the current administration. So in Russia, they have something they call doppelganger campaigns. And what they are, they're fake media sites that push this anti-police, anti-Trump content. And you might say, well, wait a minute, I thought Vladimir Putin liked Donald Trump. Well, it doesn't matter. Vladimir Putin likes Vladimir Putin, and he likes Russia, and anything he can do to take the United States down a notch is going to make it more likely that he will win in Ukraine and be able to stay in power. So without a doubt, the Russians are engaging in asymmetric warfare right now against the United States, and this is one of the ways they do it. So they put up these fake media sites that push anti-police, anti-Trump content. The goal is to sow division and erode your trust in the US government, as if you needed help with that, right? China does the same thing through something, their influence operations that they call spamiflage. They're bot networks that pose as US activists on social media, and they can use AI now to generate content. I've seen it. It happens all the time on my YouTube channel. When I go through and check the comments on these videos after we get done, when I finish my live, I go through and check the comments. If I ever do a video that has to do with the war in Ukraine or about Russia or something like that, I will get dozens, if not hundreds, of comments from bot farms that at first glance look like it's a real person. But if you look at it a little closer, there are some tells that will let you know that this is actually from a bot. It's an AI that's generating these comments. Sometimes the comments just are not real relevant to the conversation, or sometimes, they'll be on topic, but it's just the way it's written. It's like, that's weird. And then the username is not, here we've got some of the usernames I'm looking at right now. Robert Ben David Jr., Leslie's Wicker, Scooter 500, Jesse James, Jonathan Rush. Those are pretty normal usernames. The usernames that you see from these bot farms very often are like Joe 315793XJ56, or something like that, because they're just randomly generated usernames. And that tells me, okay, that's a bot. And I try to delete all those. Okay, but these are ongoing campaigns, not just right now during these riots, but they really ramp them up during these riots in order to stoke the fire and to convince people that this is okay, that this is what you need to do. You need to go out and you need to riot in the streets. You need to confront the police. You need to stand in front of the ICE vehicles as they're trying to do their job, right? So, Diane, I have not had a chance to put out the written summary from yesterday, because I'm on the tour here, and I'm really carving out a piece of the tour for me to do these lives. And so I haven't had time. And all of my employees, or most of them, are here on the tour with me. So we're operating on a skeleton staff right now. So forgive me, but we know we haven't had a chance to do that. So in addition to things like this, where the Russian state media is really amplifying these riots in the press, then these bot farms take links to these stories and spread them far and wide and make them look like organically generated content or organically generated interest on social media. And so you've got, I mean, literally, they call this inauthentic behavior in at Facebook and Twitter and places like that. And they have people who and algorithms that are supposed to look for this stuff, but it's a cat and mouse game because the bot farms and using AI keep getting smarter and smarter and finding ways around it. But we're talking about thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of bots reposting the news that's being put out by the Russian state media, which makes it sound like cops in the United States are shooting journalists in the head, things like that. Stories that are meant and worded in a way that is meant to rile people up and get them mad. Some of the content is completely AI generated. And so I've seen stuff on social media. You got to be real careful what you believe now. Even video can be tampered with very easily. And so photographs and videos, or they use old photographs from other riots and other places. Actually, ABC was accused a couple days ago of using footage from Gaza and saying that it was Ukraine, saying that Ukraine looked like that after the Russians attacked Ukraine with over 500 drones, the largest drone attack since the war started the other day in Kyiv. And believe me, Kyiv is a city of over 4 million people. The Ukrainians have pretty good air defenses, and they shot down more than 90% of the drones and missiles that were fired at them. But there were still a couple dozen that struck Kyiv. But that doesn't mean that Kyiv is a smoking ruin like Gaza is. And so that kind of misleading content is exactly what we see that's being put out by these bot farms, by China using their spamouflage influence operations. And the goal is to spread racial tension, put out false footage of ICE abductions, quote unquote, pit Americans against each other, weaken the U.S. global image, and foment internal collapse ultimately in the United States. It's coordinated, it's intentional, and it really should be considered an act of war. So if this continues, you're going to see a repeat of the economic devastation we saw during the BLM riots in 2020. You're going to see police and city services collapse under the cost and the liability and the morale stress that they face, the police face. You're going to see citizens starting to take the law into their own hands. I talked about that on a live the other day where I was pointing out the article written by Matt Bracken. It's over at chuckholton.com right now. You can go look it up and read that article. It's called When the Music Stops, America's Cities Will Explode in Violence. And it explains how vigilantes will start to take matters into their own hands and try to put a stop to these riots with lethal force. And that obviously could get out of hand in a hurry. Then, if that happens, for sure, the federal government will respond with sweeping increases to their authority, sweeping increases to surveillance, curfews, et cetera, martial law, even perhaps. And our adversaries around the world cheer while America self-destructs. That's the bottom line. So these protesters, or say they're out protesting for justice, protesting for freedom, but what they are really sparking is the very collapse that they say they're fighting against. in the wreckage, we might end up with a much more authoritarian place to live than we have currently. So we have to watch out for that. And look, President Trump's doing the right thing by calling in the, I mean, they've got to restore order. We have to be a country of laws. We have to be a country that's organized and where people follow the law. But as I said before, any people that is incapable of self-control must be controlled from without. If you can't be controlled from within, you have to be controlled from without. That's why 4-year-olds are not allowed to live on their own, because they don't have any impulse control. They're not able to control themselves. They must be controlled by a more responsible adult. And these children that are out there in the streets lighting things on fire right now are just begging for somebody to come in and force them to follow the law. And that will get costly for all of us. All right, folks, that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching the Hot Zone. I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. We've had 25,000 people watching this live today already. And that's, again, for a channel the size of ours, that is way above our level, okay? And that's all because of you guys hitting that like button, commenting, and sharing this channel with your friends. So please continue to do that. Make sure that you are subscribed, and we'll see you again next time. So